Okay, I'll start and then people can just kind of drop in as they want to. So I know most of you here, so welcome. We, myself and Sarah have had a discussion about doing some faculty sessions just to really kind of update our staff on what is happening with BePAD, even if they're new staff or if they are old staff, because there has been some changes. So I think some of you, most of you are newish, some of you are older. So what I will do, and we can tailor it. I haven't got a PowerPoint or anything like that because I'm going to use the live system to kind of go through it, because I think that's probably the best thing to do because it's what you see, so it's just easier. So I've logged myself on as a student, as well as a practice assessor, and as well as a link lecturer / academic advisor. So you can see all kind of stages of what the student sees and what you need to do. So my idea behind kind of this session was to look at, in terminology, of what you need to do as link lecturers and what sections you need to fill out, what kind of the changes are, and I think probably, do most of you know the differences between the roles? Because I think that's really important, between the roles of overseer, practice assessor, practice supervisor, and academic assessor. Does everyone?
The overseer, I think.
Okay.
You have told me about it,
Yeah.
but I still think you haven't quite got it in my
No,
head.
that's fair enough. And I think there is still a little bit kind of, I'm not too sure. Okay, so I think probably first things first is we probably just go through those roles because it doesn't take that long. So when a student goes into practice, they are allocated a practice supervisor and a practice assessor. A student can have many practice supervisors, so they can have as many as they need to. A practice supervisor doesn't have to directly work with them, but it's idealistically if they do, because they don't work with the practice supervisor, one practice supervisor for the whole time. Exactly as it was a mentor, you'd have many mentors, or you'd have two mentors, and you'd try and work with them, but you would have other members of staff that would work with those students as well. The idea now is that they are all kind of practice supervisors surrounding that. Any practice supervisor can sign hours, can give feedback, can do an initial and a midway review for a student. So they can do all of those things. A practice assessor, there is only one. There is only ever one. And there can't be more than one, purely because that kind of goes outside of the NMC standards views on what practice assessors should do. Now, I know that there are some students that have added practice assessors on their system as 2 or 3 because the PEU system is only set up to have one name, which is unfortunately practice assessor, which is including all of the roles. So that could be a supervisor, that could be an overseer, that could be an assessor. That is being looked into, but at the minute it's going to stay like that. But you guys as link lecturers just need to be very aware that they must only have one practice assessor. Where we have problems with things like practice assessors in practice is if they're in like a health visiting placement, or they're in a placement that hasn't quite yet figured out who their practice assessors are, or they haven't yet had a training session to be a practice assessor. In those cases, what we are advising is that they cross-link. So for example, I've got specialist surgery outpatients. They haven't got any practice assessors at this current time, so they are cross-linking with specialist surgery inpatients where they have a practice assessor. The student, idealistically, needs to kind of work alongside that practice assessor a couple of times. That doesn't mean they have to work with them, just means they have to work alongside them, so the practice assessor can have an overview of what that student is doing in practice. This is where it's really important that we let supervisors know what they need to do. So practice supervisors must produce formal feedback, because the only way a practice assessor can do the final review, and the practice assessor is the only person that can do those final reviews. So the only way they can do that is by having feedback, either seeing them in practice as an overseer, not in that terminology, but seeing them in practice by looking at them and saying, I'm the ward matron, or I'm the charge nurse in charge that day. I've seen them, they're working very well with their practice supervisor. I've seen them do some NG2 passing or whatever they're going to be doing. So they need the written feedback from the supervisors, which will be uploaded on the BePAD, and I'll show you where that's uploaded on there. The practice assessor There is only one. So they are linked by the student. Practice supervisors are linked by the student. Overseers are linked by the student. Linked lecturers are linked by the student. Academic advisors are linked by the student. You cannot link yourself to a student. They have to link them to you to them. So they have to do it. They won't come up on your system unless they've linked you. Okay? So the practice assessor can do the initial, the midpoint, and the final. It's unusual that a practice assessor would do the initial and the midpoint, but they can do it. Okay? So the reason it's unusual is because they might not be spending direct time with that student very frequently. So normally the practice supervisor will spend direct time with, so they normally do their initial and their midpoint. If the practice supervisor is doing the initial and the midpoint, the practice assessor must look at both the initial and the midpoint and say, yes, okay, that's perfect, this student's doing well, I'm happy with what's going forward, and I'm happy with what my practice supervisor has said in these sections. And there's a section in the BePAD for them to fill out in those areas. An overseer is anyone that either has got registration, hasn't got registration, may have a different registration, but is in that area, such as a volunteer, such as a healthcare assistant, such as a carer, someone like that has seen them in practice and has worked alongside them. They can only sign their hours or write feedback. All of these roles I am going to put onto the Moodle site for the staff room. In the staff room I'm going to make a BePAD section and the roles will go in there, as well as how to push SBE hours, etc. if you need to do that in your roles. So they will all go on there. Again, an overseer can only be added by the student themselves. So the student is the person that's paramount in this section. They have to add those individuals. Okay? Does that make sense?
The NMC documentation is quite clear about those roles.
Yes, yeah.
So the link to those NMC standards.
Yeah, so on the NMC standards it tells you exactly what they are as well. Yeah. So it tells you kind of all of the information you need to know about the roles. But we will put them on there as well, so it's readily available, so you can just click on it and send them out.
So sorry, did you say the overseer can actually sign off the hours?
Yeah, they can sign off the hours, yeah. Yeah, if they've worked with them, they can absolutely sign off the hours.
And then obviously find them.
Yeah, and they can provide feedback for them if they've worked with them. Because especially if they're, someone that's working like a healthcare assistant, and they've worked with them, they might have worked with them directly for a shift, looking after a specific patient that may need, care throughout the day, and they've been allocated to that patient just as a HCA, and then there's the practice supervisor does all of the medication. Granted, we want the student to work with them as well, but just to learn the fine-tuning skills of communication with that patient, etc., washing, cleaning. So they can definitely work with them for a day and get them to sign it off on the shift. Any questions about roles?
So occasionally I've been much smaller teams. I've had got a student who's working with a practice assessor mainly, but when she's on holiday, she's going to be with a registered member of staff, just a nurse, but who hasn't done any of the course, any of the training.
They will then be an overseer.
Okay.
Because they haven't got the training in that respect. So they've done no mentorship course or anything like that.
Okay, but that's okay because
if
they can still provide that feedback.
Yeah, they can still provide the feedback, definitely, so that's why it's really important. If they haven't had practice supervisor training, they would then be an overseer in that respect.
Okay.
Yeah. And hopefully they can then go on a practice supervisor training course that comes up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the respect of what you guys, I'm just going to go to what you guys will do for the first instance. As you can see here, I'm logged on as a practice assessor, and this is me as a linked lecturer, just my role as a linked lecturer. And this student is the NMC student. It's just a test student that we use, so I can go about things and fiddle around with things without breaking anything. So as a linked lecturer, exactly the same as the old paper copy of the documentation. If you've seen it, if you haven't, then it will look a little bit, obviously, a bit new to you guys. You basically have to write some comments in the midway review and the final review. And the only other thing you need to do is sign off placement completion. So in the midway review of progress, if I click on it, you have got all of your rubrics and your rubric statements. So domain 1 to domain 4, and what you will see is your student should have, they haven't here because obviously we're just on test students, your student should have marked themselves, graded themselves, and then your practice supervisor, because this is midway, again it can be an assessor if you wish them to be, but the practice supervisor normally will have then given a mark as well. They will have then written in here, the student would have written in here why they believe they've got them scores, and the practice supervisor or assessor will have written in why they've given them scores. They'll go through each of those domains and do exactly the same thing through each of those domains. This is domain 2, communication. They'll go through each one and click on save as they go through.
Is there a dependency on the sequence? Does the student have to do that?
No, there isn't. No, there is no dependency on the sequence in this step. So the student can be sitting there with the practice assessor or supervisor. We idealistically tell our students they should be doing theirs first, but that's not a stipulation on the BePAD. No. It would be very strange if a practice supervisor decided to do their scores before a student had done theirs, because they have no evidence to revert back to on how they're going to score that student. So realistically, our students do know this. They should know this, that they should be doing their scoring first, so that they've got some feedback to give to their supervisor or assessor at this stage, and then they can go, oh yes, I definitely agree with you, I give you a 4 or whatever, etc. So they go through each section. As I'm logged on as a student, it's logged me off. I apologise because it defaults these systems, so I'm just going to log back on as myself. Apologies. This is the logistics of having 3 windows open that are different. Okay. As you can see, when we first set up our accounts, they were still mentors.
Sometimes if you have different explorers, you can log in.
This is what I've done on my Firefox. I've logged on as Firefox, and I'm doing Chrome as well. But it's,
as well,
so we've got a student. Apologies. Got 2 students at the minute. Practice assessor. So this is taking a long time because I've got quite a lot of students linked to me as an actual live, whereas the NMC test students just their own account, and you can obviously see I've got quite a lot of linked lecturees, so that's why it's taking a long time to load. So if you have got lots of linked lecturees, actually is a good point to make. You saw the list of students. You literally just click on whichever student you wanted to go to. Okay, so I'm just going to go back into midway review of progress. So what you can see after all the domains have been filled out, so I've just gone through these, and there's nothing in them because the student hasn't marked themselves, and neither has the practice supervisor or assessor. But when you're in practice, you will see that they have got marks. The student have written their stuff, and the practice assessor and supervisor would have written their stuff. And then there'll be key areas for development to improve grades. That's for the practice supervisor or assessor to fill in. So for them to fill in to say where the student needs to develop in their areas going forward. And then you literally just write your comments in this section. Sometimes people struggle with having a cursor that doesn't come up. If you just keep on double clicking on it, I know it's a bit annoying, it will eventually come up, and just start typing and it should come up. Sometimes the cursor doesn't come up very quickly. So just click on it. And it will go through. I'll go on to the final one because actually that one's will show you an incomplete one that hasn't got a tick, which is exactly the same. And I'll show you where things are. So if you see, this is exactly the same layout. The final assessment of practice is exactly the same. They have to go through the domains. They have to go through and score everything. But this time the practice assessor is going to be filling it out. So in your section, you write in what you want to say about your student. Just be very aware there is a spell check. If I wrote something like this, It doesn't come up like our lovely Word or our Google Sheets or our Google Docs as having a little red line underneath it, but you can spell check it. So please do. You just need to click on it and it will then come back and say there's spelling errors. Of course there's spelling errors, and I'll click on left click, not right click, and it will come up with a word which we're not going to put in there. So you literally just need to write your comments in there. And once you have done that, you then need to sign it as complete. Be aware you cannot fill out your section. Actually, that's a lie. You can fill out your section before your practice supervisor has finished their section, but idealistically you wouldn't, because you wouldn't know what the scores are going to be. So the process in this section is student fills their section out. Not necessarily that the BePAD you have to fill out before the next person fills it out, but we say in the university we need to fill out because they have feedback. The practice supervisor or assessor will fill their part out, you fill your part out, and you can then click it off as complete. Is there any questions about which sections as a linked lecturer you need to fill out in respect of what you're writing? So beginning part, practice supervisor or assessor can fill out. Midway, practice supervisor or assessor can fill out. Final action plan and final assessment of practice, because it is summative, it's the practice assessor that has to fill it out.
And is it the practice assessor that has to complete all the content?
Yes. As a practice supervisor, you will not be given the rights to do that. So what will happen if you try and access it is it will come up with a little no entry sign, basically, and says you cannot fill this out. So if there's anyone that comes back to you and says, I can't fill this bit out, you will say to them, are you the student's practice supervisor or are you the student's practice assessor?
Is it worthwhile saying at the beginning of the setup of the placement that if an assessor or a supervisor has a pre-existing log-on, they have to self-identify which role they are going to assume in relation to this
So
assessment? Or has that all
it's a good point, actually. So does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
So obviously a practice assessor can be a supervisor or a practice assessor or an overseer. It is not the practice supervisor or assessor's role to distinguish which role they are going to be assigned to. It is the student's job to do that. So when they go into placement, they will need to know who their practice assessor is and who their practice supervisors are, and they will then allocate them to those roles.
So we've had situations where the students can't find the assessor or the supervisor in the drop-down list, even though they exist as they have accounts, and Axia has advised that they fixed that for us in the background.
Okay,
So I'm just thinking that
I've
if
had that
people,
actually,
yes.
they haven't been able to find a member of staff who is...
So maybe we need to talk about that offline.
Yeah, so maybe that's... So you've had the same issue with having the student not being able to find the...
Yeah.
Find
I think
generally...
she sorted it in the end, I can't remember how. But
So
got Axia to sort it. I think it might have possibly been the same one.
maybe.
at the minute, we are still, because this is transitioned from when our practice supervisors and assessors were mentors.
Yeah.
Some of them haven't yet still logged on again. So when they log on for the first time again, they will be prompted to tell them what role they are now holding. So are you a practice assessor? Are you a practice supervisor?
That student.
If they haven't done that, the student will not be able to find them even if they haven't
And
done
that's
it.
the point I was wanting to try to get across,
Yes.
because I think you'll get students getting quite hot into the collar.
Okay, so say that again. So we've got to then ask the member of staff
To log on.
to log on.
So if they log on with
the row.
with their original credentials, they will then log on and they will have a prompt that says, hello, welcome back. You know, are you now a practice supervisor or are you a practice assessor or are you an overseer?
Okay.
So they must select that role
Right.
before the student can allocate them, because the system hasn't allocated them a role yet, so they cannot be seen as a practice supervisor or an
What
assessor.
happens when they are an assessor
Mhm.
for one student and a supervisor for another?
The student will add them as a supervisor if they're their
But they
supervisor.
self-identify in a role.
No, so that's not, this is a really good point.
Because it's in relation to
So-
that particular instance of thing.
On the pop-up box that they have, and I think we probably need to write something about this, which is fine, it pops up and says, I'm a practice assessor, I'm a practice supervisor, I'm an overseer.
So they can tick each box then?
No, they can only tick one.
In relation to that one student?
No,
Oh, generally?
as a general overview.
Okay.
So this is not for a particular student, this is for them as an entirety. They choose their highest role.
Right, because if you're an assessor, you can be a supervisor.
Because if you're an assessor, the BePAD will automatically allocate you as, it will give you the responsibilities as all.
Three.
If you are a supervisor, it will only give you the responsibilities of an overseer and a supervisor. It would not give you the responsibilities. You will not be able to be found by a student if you put their name in.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that maybe needs to be communicated with, and this is why these days are good as well, so you can bring up things and you can put that forward to them as well. It's their highest role that they need to allocate, not for an individual student.
So with that member of staff re-logs on, puts practice assessor, the student can then link them as
Whichever role.
Supervisor.
Yeah.
Or a supervisor.
Yeah. Yeah. Or all well, the student, that's also a good point as well. So the student is only allowed to have one practice assessor and several practice supervisors. They cannot be a supervisor and an assessor for the same student. So if you're an assessor for one student, you cannot be a supervisor for one student for the same student. Yep, so they can only hold one role in that respect. If you're a supervisor for one student, then obviously you can be an assessor for a different student, and vice versa. So that assessor that was for the previous student can be the supervisor for that student, for a different student. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there are a few things that do need to be fine-tuned. We are very aware of these things, and we are working on them as diligently as we can. But if things do come up, please email us, because we can then bring them forward and we can try and fix them quickly if they are something that's super important. So you guys as link lecturers just need to fill out your midway review of progress and then your final assessment of practice. You can see all the kind of dashes, and it's a little bit like teaching psychology, and I apologise about that. But each dash refers to who can fill it out, so you can fill out what section. So you can see at the start of the placement you have, which is a little tick list for the student. It's only the student that needs to fill that part out. It's not the practice assessor or supervisor or the link lecturer. The initial placement meeting needs to be filled out by the student and the practice assessor or practice supervisor. And then as you go forward, you can see midway review needs to be filled out by all three people. At the end of the placement, your role, again, as link lecturers, is to check that they have the right amount of hours. So everyone should have in their offices or whatever the big laminated sheet that Liz and the team have made, which tells you when the hours are due in. Yeah? Is that a question? Okay. So if
CP, Moodle sites are probably the most authoritative.
Okay.
The dates are right, I think, but the number of hours are wrong.
Wrong.
1 and 2.
Okay. So CP module folder, then Moodle folder.
Can I just say that I'm an associate link lecturer, so I don't get any of this information.
So
It's a special question.
what's useful for you is that if you email, are you adult link lecturer? Is if you email Paul on, and he will send you or give you access to the document there, and it will tell you what hours need to be achieved.
So is it a deadline? What's the document called then?
It's the CP deadlines, module deadlines, and deadlines for hours. It tells you everything, hours and competencies, etc., when they need to be sent off. So Paul on will be your safe bet for adult. So it's your responsibility as well as the student's responsibility, because they obviously have access to all of those sites, so they should know when their hours are due and what hours they need to put forward. And if it's their first placement, then you obviously just need to look at those hours there. The competency framework, again, it's your responsibility as well as the students and the practice supervisor and assessor when you're doing their final review or their midpoint review, to make sure that if it's their first placement that they have achieved all of their core competencies. So all 8 of their core competencies. And the core competencies are on the competency framework list. So there's the competencies in their entirety, and then there's a checklist. And you can see if they're green, they're passed, if they're red, they're failed. And hopefully none of our students get to the fail stage, which is why we have midpoint reviews, so that we can stop them from failing or help them out with what they're failing with in those respects. But we do know that sometimes that does happen. And that's why we kind of set up our action plans going forwards there. This just shows you the list of what they are and what the competencies are that need to be achieved, including non-core competencies and core competencies. These, if you click on the competency tag just here, tell you about them, and they're broken down into what progression point 1 expects of them. So they're just a whole entirety of each domain.
Sorry, Hayley, can I just... So, because the assessor is the only person to pass or fail them, then the supervisor can't see them to then discuss them at the
They can see them.
They can see them.
Yeah, they can see them, they just can't sign them off.
Sometimes
Yeah.
you might need a conversation
No, of
to
course.
say, you know, you've done all of this, but you're not
Yeah.
doing this part
Yeah.
of their competency. Right, that's fine.
What I've just recently discussed with Axia as well is in the midpoint, obviously because this is a separate section, so you can see you have to go into the competency framework to see the competency framework. I've asked them if they're able to put a little pop-up or a little, in their further guidance section in the midway and final, there's a little drop down, they can see then what competencies are, so that they can then write about them in there.
Okay.
So they don't have to then go out of it to come back into it to go into competency framework. So that is under review at the minute.
Thank you. Just wanted to...
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. The practice supervisors can definitely access it.
So Hayley, can I just ask, so when, if you use the main framework for them to sign off competency, doesn't that automatically get transferred to the checklist?
Yes, yeah. So the only way the practice assessor can sign them off is actually through the competencies.
Yeah.
They can't sign it off through the checklist.
Okay.
Yeah, so what happens is if they go into the checklist and they go, oh yes, you've definitely signed that one, they can click on this link, and what will happen is it will automatically direct them to the main competency there, and then there's a little drop-down menu that they can go into and then sign them off. If I've got the assessor, I can probably go into it and show you. So if you go into competency framework, I'm logged on as an assessor. So if I just scroll down, say, non-core competency 1C, you can see I have a little box and I can do them as pass, fail or can't be achieved. There's no reason that you should ever have to put can't be achieved on your competency document, because most if not all areas can achieve them, and it's normally the non-core competencies, and they can do them in the next placement if they can't achieve them in the first placement. So they don't have to put not achieved, they just have to leave it alone if it's a non-core. So you can just click on pass and you click save, and it will automatically come up with my digital signature and what date I've signed it as completed on there. So just to show you an overview of that, you can see there how many. It says here 2 out of 23 is because this student is in their second placement. If they were in their first placement, so you can see down here, is this placement your final? Yes. If they were in their first placement, it would come up with 2 out of 8 because they only need to achieve the core competencies for the first placement.
Oh, right. Sorry, I hadn't tweaked
Yeah, it's these little things that do. So if I change these details, so well, actually, I don't know
But
if
if they achieve non-core, it's fine.
yeah, of course, yeah.
But
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so if they achieve non-core, it just doesn't
Of course
highlight.
it does. Sorry, I'm now
Yeah.
thinking logically. Yes.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
it doesn't
I'm thinking
then
logically now.
it just doesn't come up.
Yeah.
But if you went into the competency framework, it would show what non-core competencies
Yeah.
that they have got.
Is it worth talking about the setup of that second placement in the academic year? Because that seems to be something students sometimes misapprehend.
What do you mean in?
Setting the second placement as the
So-
final of the academic year.
The students taught this, but again, because they have
so actually
yeah.
a chance to sort of stop it before it goes too far, I'd have thought.
the students are taught what to do, but they're taught in their first year. And they forget. So it's completely understandable because there's so much information they have to know. So basically, the student has the opportunity. So I've logged on as a student. I'm logged on as a student, just here you can see. We can click on edit details. So me as a student can change the details. And they come up with a little list of where they are. This is how they select their placements. And they've got 2 little boxes. And obviously, if they're doing it in a rush, and they're trying to open their second placement of their second year, and they're like, oh, I've got to rush, got to get it open, they click on that, and it automatically defaults to this is not my final placement of the year. Now, they only have 2 placements each year, so if they're on their second placement, it is their final placement.
I think it was the January student
Yeah, I think some of September are the same as well. So it's completely
It
understandable.
means of the academic year,
Yeah.
not the calendar.
Yeah, not the calendar year, which makes it a bit confusing. So
You can't close the progression point if they don't get this right.
yes. So if I click on update placement, this will now give me different
So they can
ideology.
switch it.
Yeah, they can switch it across, yeah. So the student can do this. So it's really useful if you guys as linked lecturers, if you know it's their second placement and you scroll down and you go, oh yeah, just have a little glance, placement is final, oh hang on, they've said no. Then you can get in contact with the student and say, can you just go in and say this is your final placement because you are on your second placement of the year.
So final placement of each year?
Of each progression point. Yeah.
I always think of final placement means final placement.
No.
I have to
Exactly,
say,
and they all do. It's not worded very well.
as a new member of staff, I read that and said, no, it's not their final placement. So when I saw no, I didn't bother about it because I thought it's not their final placement.
So what do you call the final placement?
Well, it's still their final academic year placement.
Yeah.
So
It's
just
just
saying
if they
it
don't
is.
do that,
Yeah.
you will find it difficult to close down the
Yeah,
progression point. And then they start adding the third placement as still in progression point 1, but it's actually progression point 2.
Okay.
We've only had a few students do that, which is quite useful.
yeah, and once I knew, I went in. They went and changed it. Once
Yeah.
I realised. that
Yeah, no,
that's
that's
the way I
completely-
changed it, so.
Which is great. So they can change it, and it's really easy change. So it's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
before you start doing things. So again, another role for you guys is you have to complete the placement. Now this role used to sit with the link lecturer, the student, as well as the academic advisor or previous mentor that was. We've now removed the mentor or practice assessor supervisor from this section because they didn't need to be part of it. So when you click on close placement, it doesn't automatically close it, so don't worry. You go into it and it will literally give you a summary of what's been achieved. So this is again another prompt for you to go, oh, have they got the right hours in there? Are they in there? Are we happy with them? Have they got their simulation-based experience? The student should know what SBE days that they have been attending to, and if it's their first placement, then they should have 3 lots of 12, so 36 hours in there. They might have had some action learning sets. They might have had some mandatory training as well, which is counted as direct care hours, which will be added in there, but they will be in the total direct care hours box. It will show you what the round total is, and it will then show you the final assessment of practice. If you click on view scores, it will give you an overview of what their scores are, which is quite nice to see at the end. And it will then say competency framework, 1 core competency out of 8 has been achieved.
Sometimes I have to verify the competency.
Yeah, so if it's their final placement of the year, you have to verify to make sure that they've achieved everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that new then?
It is a new thing, and it can be done by the practice supervisor, the practice assessor, which it should be done with by the practice supervisor or practice assessor to say that they've achieved everything within the placement, but you guys as link lecturers can do that as well.
So, okay, so the practice assessor hasn't done it for some reason?
Yeah, you can just click it and say, yes, I have verified that they've got 770 hours for their first year and they've got, all 23 competencies out of the year, and you just click that off. The only way you can close a placement is if the student has already closed it. You cannot close it until they've closed it. And that's just to make sure that they are happy that they're going to close this placement, because that will then lead them onto a prompt to say which they're going to set up a new placement, and it's going to come up. And you can see that the student's already done it, so I can just literally say, I'm ready to close this placement. I'm not going to sign it off because it will literally close it and I can't undo it. I have signed it. I've signed it off there, and it's closed. Normally it comes up with a yes, you can close this, but I've signed it here, and it says oh, it's because I'm the student. I can't do that bit. I'm going to close that part, and it will then close it down, and it will say for the student, it will come up with that little list of where to go for their next placement, unless they're in their second placement of the year, and then it will that will be the role then of the academic assessor. So those of you that have been here before, I don't know, there's not many of you actually, so you originally, the progression point, when you closed progression point 1, so when you closed the placement, it came up with a prompt to say, have you had your end of year review with your academic advisor? Does everyone know what you do in your academic? for your end of year review. So in the course section, so we're originally on progression point 1. In the course section, if I'm logged on as me, I am. So if I go to the student dashboard, this is me logged on now as a linked lecturer or academic advisor, whatever I wish to be. I'm going to use an MSc test student as my student. If I click on course, I have got course activities here, which are review of development, progression point 1, review of development, progression point 2, review of development, progression point 3. Basically, as an academic advisor, you should be meeting with your student to verify that they have achieved everything going forward for that first year of practice. So they have got their scores that they need to get, they've got their competencies, which we know because they're already signed off by the link lecturer. If that's you as well, lucky you, because you can see everything. That they've got their academic scores have been good, or they might need some further support with that, giving them some advice. So it's normally a meeting that you will have with the student. Before that meeting, the student, and it's really useful to kind of send them an email if you are going to do an email or a Google Doc to say when you're free, it's really good for you to say, go to your review of development for year 1, click on it, and fill it out for me. So if I go onto this, I'm logged on as a linked lecturer here, not as a student. So when you're logged on, if you're logged on as a student, the student will have a box to complete for each of these sections. So what feedback have you received from your mentors, other professionals? It gives them prompts about what to put in here. So they will fill this out, they will come to a meeting with you and they will say, this is my lovely review. You can look at it if they've been really proactive and they've done it before they've met with you, and you can go, oh, brilliant, this is really, really good. That's fantastic. I've looked at your academic work on Banner. I've seen your scores. You've done really, really well. Or maybe think about going to upgrade. A little bit of advice surrounding there. And basically, it's the student kind of going through and how they feel that they've done for the year. In the comments box, you should be saying things like, I've reviewed your marks, you've done very well, or you might need a little bit more support with your critiquing. In your professional practice, you've got some great scores, you've done specifically well in cardiac, you've got some lovely feedback from the patients themselves, which was really nice to see. Make sure that you develop your skills around your competencies, make sure you're writing your action plans with SMART objectives, etc., which is what your link lecturer is going to be doing as well. And then you need to probably write something. This is just me telling you this. It's completely up to you what you write in these sections. But you can put things in there like about essential care needs. So, has the student done any essential care needs? And I will show you where they are available on the BePAD. You can look at them before they come in to see you because it's electronic. Have they done any essential care needs? Have you reviewed them? Have you signed them off? Have you put comments in them? Yes, they've done 5. I'm really happy with them. They've been a really proactive student. They're really good reflections. They've just got another 3, 4 more to do. Carry on with doing this proactively. And also, have they done their 2 reflections for the year? Realistically, and the same as what we had when we had the paper pad, there was a progression point tick list that you used to have to tick them off and say, yes, they've done their essential care needs, or they've done a couple, and I've seen them, and they've definitely done their 2 reflections of the year. And you shouldn't really be progressing a student unless those things have been completed. And the student knows that as well from their handbook. They should be doing these reflections. So this is where this used to prevent the student from progressing into year 2. Now this section on end of year review is now not related to a progression point. They don't have to have completed it before they move into progression point 2. So this is for you guys as academic advisors now to push for and say you need to get these things done. Previously they had to complete the end of year review and you had to say yes and sign it off before they could then progress into the second year. That's been taken out now. So it's now only in the course section that you need to fill this out and have a meeting with them. So it's really for you guys to kind of push forward and say...
who instigates the meeting? Is it the AAs?
You guys do as AAs, yeah.
And when would you recommend that?
So that's a difficult question. You can do them at any time before they start again in September, but then obviously they're going to go on holiday in between. So it's probably best before at the end of their second placement of the year, just afterwards when they're finalising parts or they're finalising that last bit, to have that kind of meeting around then. So some people say late July, early August if they're not away, depends on if they're a January cohort, depends on if they're a September cohort, and depends on when they're around. I tend to do mine around July and hope the students come.
Why this was decoupled.
Yes, so yeah.
Timing of the placements that run into that early summer period, even midsummer.
Yeah.
So what happens then if they don't?
If they don't meet with you?
Well, no. Well, if they don't, you say that that's been removed, that they can progress. There must come a point when, if they haven't done these things, they can't qualify.
So in third year, if they haven't done their essential care needs and they haven't had their verification form signed, then they can't go onto the register. So there'll become a point in their third year, which is why, as academic advisors, we need to be, kind of proactive in being like, we really. But you're right, there is a certain point where we kind of go, actually, we need to probably bring this up with the module lead or the module team or the subject coordinators and say, they're failing to achieve their reflections despite constant communication with them and me asking them, and then maybe something needs to happen then going forward in that respect. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is now no, which is something we've very much pondered when we were doing it, and it was the discussion between many people that came up with that idea. We said yes, that's the way to go. This respect.
I understand it, logically it makes sense, but I actually saw a student who had been ignoring my emails since the day I got here, and he had to come and see me because he couldn't progress.
Yeah.
And actually, in the end, we had a really fruitful discussion. I said to him, well, I've been emailing you, and you just ignored me.
Yeah.
So I understand.
It's quite useful.
But it's quite useful for those students who just don't bother to engage. And, it's okay, things were fine, but if things aren't fine with the student and they still don't engage, it becomes problematic.
So then that's what
useful.
Yeah, I think we have to just be really aware of the fact of their fitness to study in that respect, because they're doing all of the kind of things that we need to have tick boxes for, like the assignments that are definitely needed to happen. They're going to placement, they're getting their scores, which is definitely needing to happen, but they're not engaging with things, like essential care needs or reflections, or they may have done them, but they may have not uploaded them, which is quite a possibility.
Sure.
But you don't know that because you're not there with them. So yeah, I absolutely understand. It may all change with the South PAD or the BePAD that's going forward in September 2020, but we can approach that as we see from the things we've learned from BePAD here. So I said about the essential care needs. The way that you can see them is if you go into the course section again, and just below there's a little section that says essential care needs for all people. And what will happen is...
can you just tell me how the students see this? Because I met two students on place that were in their second year and denied all knowledge of these.
Yeah, so that's a student. So the student does exactly the same thing, goes into course, it looks exactly the same as yours does. Let me just make sure I'm still logged on as a student, and if they just click on essential care needs... I'm still as a student, that's good. They just need to scroll down. It looks exactly the same as ours does. But what they have that we don't is they have an add new record. So if they click on add new record, basically it will come back with what essential care need is this? And you just click on it as a drop down and they go, oh, it's the one that's related to people with learning disabilities. They have some goals to take forward into practice following completion of the virtual family. And they can say things like, I'd like to bring some SMART goals saying, I'd like to nurse a patient that has learning disabilities and learn how to communicate with them. That can be a goal to take forward. You can do several, and then they have their reflection. They have a box with the reflection, and they would put in a good reflection on that using a cycle, and then action plans to be brought forward can be very similar to the goals that they have set, and then evidence presented to support the achievement. They can add the competency numbers in there that they're going to relate them to. They then click save and finish as a student, and what comes up is, you can see it doesn't come up on here yet because me as an academic advisor have not gone into it. So if I go back into it now and do a little refresh, because it won't come up because I'm logged on as separate things, you can see here it comes up now for me to review, so I can view that record. And I can go, oh yes, that's really, really useful. Now, the one thing that they haven't got here is a comment section. So I have asked for this, as well as the reflections, to have a comment section for the academic advisor. Because once they've submitted it, you can go back to them and they can edit it. You can say, oh, can you please just make sure you put some more references in, etc., etc. It's not such a good standard format. Make sure you use a reflective cycle. You can go back to them and say that. But what would be nice here, I think, and I've had some feedback from other people, is that to have a comments box. So there's going to be a comments box to say, this is really, really good. You've taken into consideration my feedback. Thank you very much. Sign off. Happy days. And we're going to do that the same for the reflections as well. As we go into that, does that answer the question? It's exactly the same as what we see.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I got to the second year without knowing about them.
Yeah. There's quite some good, in every section there's a further guidance section, and it tells you exactly what to include in it. So there's no reason really not to know what to include in it. And in the course documentation there's an example of reflections for the students to see, so they can look at them as well in that respect.
So Hayley, do they have to do the virtual family
so
examples before they...
No, so the virtual family at the minute sits within Education in Nursing Practice 2, where they have to fill it out as part of the course requirements. So they have to do the virtual family. The virtual family can be used therefore going forward if they don't see one of them patients in practice. Now they have got 3 years. It's not appropriate to leave 5 essential care needs to their third year because they haven't seen them, because it's totally unrealistic, because they would definitely see them in practice. But they can leave a couple and then go, okay, I really haven't seen anyone. I'll try and do a spoke experience to see if I can find experience for them. But if they can't, then they can use the virtual family and reflect upon them in that respect if they need to do that.
Okay, so that's sort of last resort.
Yeah, it's a kind of like last minute thing. We don't know how it's going to look still yet with the new standards, whether we are still going to do essential care needs or whether we're not. Because we have moments of care now that are linked into the SouthPAD, which is the new with the new NMC standards. So we're not too sure yet how it's going to look, but there'll be more faculty information going forward with that. Just a little quick thing about the progression point 1, where I said about the professionals and shift supervisors need to give feedback. There's a section here where they would put that. So if you click on the feedback from professionals and shift supervisors. At the minute, it's looking like a form. So it's a form that the student has to download and either give or email to their practice supervisor to fill out. And what we've said is that they don't have to fill it out idealistically we'd love them to fill it out at the end of each shift, but we know, everyone knows, being in practice is just not feasible to do. So if they've worked with the same practice supervisor for several weeks or several days, at the end of that period they can then write feedback. But what I've advised the students, the first year students we've just done training with, is to keep a diary and put bullet points about what you've learnt with that mentor, or that practice supervisor, going forward, so that they know and they can go, oh, do you remember we did this, so that it kind of jogs the memory, because we know how busy places can be. We are currently devising an electronic copy of this. I'm hoping it should happen and be uploaded soon. I'm not going to say how many weeks because I don't know. So they can just log on and they can write their information in, and it will just be an automatic signature. There will still be paper copies available, so it won't be just it won't just have to happen.
So do the shift supervisors have to be linked to the BePAD to be able to do this?
Yes. So any supervisor has to be linked to be able to sign hours, to be able to do anything like that. So they have to have accounts, and going forward they're going to have to anyway, because everything's going to be electronic going forward.
On this premise of this feedback, I did a transition workshop at the Churchill week before last, and one of the concerns from the supervisor or assessors in the room was that they had been told by a number of students that they were to spend 1 hour with them each day, giving them formal feedback.
That's not true.
Exactly. And I went, and they said, has this come from the university? And I went, no, that seems unrealistic, and I think that's Chinese whispers.
That's not something that I've heard about, and it's not something I would think would be the truth.
The students would be running around desperately.
I know, and so they were really worried that this is a message that the university are giving students. And I said, I said, really honestly, I wouldn't say that we would give that message because we understand that I said, I tell my students at the end of a week would be great because you've got maybe done 3 or 5 days and that would be really good, but not every day. I have drafted an email to all of the people that were in the room at the time. Would you be happy for me to send that just to clarify that point or not?
Would you?
It should go through the LELs.
Yeah, I think it should go through the LELs. So
Okay,
it probably,
fine. I'll send it
just
to
because then
them
they can then send out or change it around a little bit.
That's fine. I've got it drafted.
Yeah,
and I
that's
thought I'd
fine,
just check before I send it. Okay.
I'm very aware that the timings we've got 3 minutes before people might need to teach again. So is there any, I know it's a very kind of whistle-stop tour, and this, I'm sure different things will come up in each of the different sessions I'm doing. So they'll be available to look at through, because they're obviously all being filmed. So please do kind of log on to them and have a little look at them and see if there's any questions that need to be answered.
Is it worthwhile mentioning the little academic hat?
Ah, yes, that is a good point, yes. So just for you to be aware of, that's a very good point. If a student is in progression point 2 and a practice supervisor or practice assessor, or if they're in progression point 1 and they're in their second placement, wants to see their previous feedback, the only way, and this is the same for if they're in progression point 2 and you want to see their essential care needs or reflections from progression point 1, the only way that you can do that is by getting an overview of the student. So if you see this little multiple hat here, you can click on that and that will give you an overview of your student. It won't show much on this one because we've only got 1 year here, but if you then click on that, it will give you all of the list of everything that's gone through of each progression point. You can just click between them. This hasn't been started yet, but you can just click between the progression points and look at everything. And again, on the course section, you can look at the student reflections that they've done. So the student might go, well, I've done 5 reflections and they're not coming up. And it might be because they've already gone into progression point 2 and they're then not linked to that progression point. So you need to go into this section to view them and any essential care needs they've done in that first progression point. You can also, so if you go to the student dashboard, it's just literally on the top there. You can also do it through looking at the reporting, and you can do a BePAD overview there as well. Just click on that and it does exactly the same.
So can the practice assessors see that as well then?
That comes up on the practice assessor as well. So if I here, so it looks exactly the same. I'm a practice assessor now, logged on, and it comes on. There's a little refresh database as well. So if they've done something and it hasn't come up with this green tick, just refresh it, and it should then come up because it takes the BePAD a little bit of time to come up with things. Is there any quick questions?
Can you see at all, Hayley, who the practice supervisors are?
Can you see a student? Yes. So if you, if I just go on as me again, if I scroll down to the NMC student I'm logged on to, practice assessor details are these lot. Practice supervisor, they haven't got one. They haven't got any overseers either, and they've got 3 linked lecturers, which would never happen, but it's just because people have been logged on. The nominated support person is the name that's been given by the NMC for linked lecturers, but we thought there were so many changes and so many new roles, we just keep it as linked lecturer. So just be aware that that's why it's just called /nominated support person, because the NMC, that's what they stipulate as the right terminology for linked lecturers. Is that all right? Any other questions, you're more than welcome to email me. And obviously, Sue and Diana and some of the team in PU are on the BePAD panel of emails so that they get these. And if it's a hard one, they'll send it to me. And then I'll try and figure it out. They're not most. You do a very good job down there. Very good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Well done.